May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be always acceptable to you, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's always good to be back here. This is a very rambunctious and energized place. Roger says that I'm the one who comes to look around and check you out. That's not exactly right, but I'm always amused when people say to me, because we're at a different church every Sunday. There are 75 congregations in this diocese. People say, it's so nice of you to come. It's so nice of you to be here. I always feel like saying, well, it's inevitable. So I'm sure that Roger has reminded you a number of times that come August the 27th, which is a Sunday, our lectionary will begin to launch us into about an eight-month journey through the book of Exodus, the second book of the Bible. The word Exodus is a Greek word. Ex means out, and hodos means pathway in Greek. So Exodus means way out, and it's the story of how the people of Israel found their way out under the leadership of Moses and the protection of God, found their way out of slavery in Egypt into difficult freedom. And this whole diocese is going to be reading through Exodus together and looking at commentaries and praying about Exodus. We're going to have a journey together because, of course, it's our story as well. The Exodus story is the story of each of us individually and collectively as we get courage from God to move out from our comfort zones into the world and the neighborhood around us. But in a way, we've already started that journey because we're reading Genesis. We heard from Genesis in our first reading today, first book of the Bible. But the traditions that developed Genesis were all formed by the crucial turning point in the history of Israel, which was that liberation, that exodus from slavery. So the book of Genesis, every verse of it anticipates and moves forward towards that Exodus story. And the first 11 chapters of Genesis are mostly about God's frustration with the human race. Nothing was turning out the way God intended it. God intended the human race to be totally in union with God and in friendship and peace with one another. But we have Adam and Eve to begin with, disobedience. Worse yet, Cain murdering his brother Abel. And then the whole human race, so wicked, God says, I'm done with all of you. And so we have Noah's flood. And God just saves the family of Noah and the ark and representatives of every animal species. But even then it's not okay, because the people that are descended from Noah all gather together in the ancient city of Babylon and build a tower so that they can take over from God. God is so upset that he says, fine, I'm going to confuse your language so that you can't understand each other and so that you cannot easily organize yourselves to be bad. So that's where the word Babel comes from, babbling, the Tower of Babel. At this point, God has almost given up. But we get to chapter 12 of Genesis, and God tries one more thing. He finds a righteous person and says, I'm going to make you the ancestor of a holy people that will be formed to be witnesses to my glory and my mercy. And the man that he chooses is Abraham. And he says to Abraham, who lives in what is now modern-day Iraq, he says to Abraham and to his wife Sarah, Go to the land that I will show you. And Abraham says, okay, I'll do it. He doesn't know where he's going, but he says yes. Paul says of Abraham, he had faith in God, he trusted in God, and God counted that as righteousness. So Abraham goes to ancient Canaan, and the story develops from there. Both Abraham and his wife Sarah are childless, and they're old. And Sarah has a slave girl named Hagar. We heard about her today. And she says to Abraham, "Take Hagar, my slave girl, as your wife, and maybe she will be able to conceive and bear a child for you." So Abraham does that, and she does conceive, and she bears a child, and Abraham names him Ishmael, the same Ishmael that our Muslim brothers and sisters consider to be so important. Years later, I won't tell you the whole story, but years later, Sarah, according to the promise of God, she conceives, and she bears a child, and they name him Isaac. You've heard of Isaac. And when we get to today's reading, Sarah sees Ishmael playing with Isaac, and she becomes afraid that Ishmael will receive the inheritance rather than Isaac. So she says to Abraham, "Send Hagar away with her son. Send her out into the wilderness." And Abraham does it. He gives Hagar a flask of water and a loaf of bread, and he sends the two out into the wilderness, and she thinks they're going to die. But God opens her eyes, and she sees a well of water, and she's able to give her child drink, and the story goes on from there. The rabbis have a lot to say about this story. The rabbis always have a lot to say about Abraham because, of course, Abraham epitomizes for all the Abrahamic faiths, that is, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Abraham epitomizes what righteousness is all about. But even Abraham has flaws, and the rabbis are interested in pointing out those flaws. First, there are two that show up in the commentaries on this story. First of all, that Abraham treats Hagar as if she were a slave rather than his wife. And secondly, I have to back up here a little bit because this is what the rabbis point out, that Abraham says earlier on in the story, "I am childless." Sarah complains to him that he should not have said, "I am childless." He should have said, "We are childless." And then the rabbis tell this story. They tell the story about a king who was walking by a prison, and there were two prisoners in the prison, and one of them called out to the king, "Please release me." So the king does release him. The other prisoner is furious. He's saying, "You should not have said, 'Please release me.' You should have said, 'Please release us.'" What that's about, of course, is that we're never supposed to forget that we're always connected to other people. We're always responsible for other people. So Sarah's complaint against Abraham is that he forgot about her too. He said, "I am childless," instead of "we are childless." There's a message for us in this story and in the rabbinic commentaries. And that is that no matter how righteous we are, no matter how much we are disciples of Jesus Christ, no matter how serious we are about our faith, we are likely to have blind spots that arise from our own self-centeredness and selfishness. I can think of one right away for many of us Christians. Last night was the last night of Ramadan. But how easy it is for us to forget that the Muslim community is also an inheritor of the righteousness of Abraham. How easy it is for us to stigmatize the Muslim community as enemies and strangers to us, simply because we are afraid that we will lose our place of privilege in the worldwide religious scene. Again, I'm going to take a risk here and talk about the Affordable Care Act. I'm sure there are all kinds of opinions in this room about what the Senate is working on, and I'm not here to enter into that debate. But it strikes me, and it may strike you also, that the level of partisanship and the need to win is so great that the vulnerable people that are most at risk are completely lost sight of. Self-centeredness and blind spot. How can we as Christians, as followers of Jesus, put all partisanship aside and be peacemakers, recognizing the dignity and the integrity of everyone wherever they stand on the political spectrum, so that no one is forgotten and no one is lost? And if you're like me, it's easy to have a blind spot about the people that are closest to us, about our spouses, our parents, our children, our friends, our co-workers. We have to work hard to be open to the Spirit of God, to break our hearts and open them to others, so that we can be truly witnesses to the exodus into which God is calling us always. An exodus from selfishness, an exodus from sin, an exodus from bitterness, an exodus into mercy and courage and humility. That's what we're taking on today as we stand in solidarity with these people who are going to be baptized or confirmed and received. We are standing in baptismal solidarity with them, once again to die with Christ that we may live with Christ. Dying to bitterness and living to mercy. That's where our true liberation and our freedom lies. May it be so. Amen.